All right, everyone, thank you for having me. So I'm Sam Huber, I'm the founder of ADMIX. We're a monetization solution for VR, and today I'd like to talk about the evolution of VR over the next couple of years and how we can actually turn it into a real business and monetize it. So if you ask colleagues or neighbors or people who are not in the VR industry and you ask them what is VR about, they would probably tell you that it's a new way to play games. And honestly, no one could blame them. About 80% of the content available at the moment on the stores is actually games. If you look at the 12 best performing apps over the last year, 11 of them were hardcore games, and one of them, Tilbrush, is maybe more like an experience. So it's pretty clear that at the moment everything is about games. Even the hardware manufacturers are using games as a way to engage their users to buy more hardware. And so I'd like to do a little parallel with in the 80s where computer manufacturers were actually doing the exact same thing, trying to get people to buy more hardware. So they were using games as a way to get more sales. And it actually makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, gamers are very early adopters. They're always willing to spend a lot of money on tech, and they also need the latest kit to be able to run the games. So it's just a very natural things to do when starting an industry. But the point is that now the computer industry is by no means limited to games. Games are obviously a big industry, but they are part of something much bigger. So we think that's going to be the same for VR over the next couple of years. The reason we think this is because we really see VR as a natural evolution of media consumption. We went from telling stories with text, with audio, with pictures, with videos, and the next step, we think, is immersive technologies. It just makes a lot of sense. It conveys stories in a much more natural way. So that new interface that is going to create, what's really interesting about it is that it removes the need for a screen, and the screen is the current interface. Whether it's on your smartphone, on your TV, on your laptop, we consume all our content through the screen, and that screen is going to disappear. So knowing that VR is that new interface, it is effectively a window towards consuming the content that we already consume today on the screen, but in a different way. So it's not going to be limited to games. So today we are very much a content machine. This shows how long you would spend consuming different type of content over your lifetime. And so if we look at the monthly figure, we are spending about 100 hours a month on the internet right now. Out of these 100 hours, about 60 hours are spent communicating or exchanging on social media. So predominantly we are very much social animals. We want to exchange, we want to share opinions, and we want to build relationship. And again, because VR is going to be a new interface, but it's not going to fundamentally change our behavior, we think that that behavior will translate into VR. And so if we had to guess, we would say that the future of VR is into social communities. The way we see that working, and we already have a few companies that are working on this, such as Rec Room, Facebook Spaces, VTime, or High Fidelity. And what they are building is very interesting. It's not a destination, it's a platform. Right now, the way that social media works, on Facebook, for example, you have this destination website where you go and then you can connect with friends and spend time and consume content. In VR, it's very, very different. Instead of being a destination, these platforms are giving people the tools to build their own communities. The communities become the destination, but the companies are actually the platform, just giving them tools. And so what it creates is it gives people this ability to have this sense of ownership, because they are part of the community that they create, and they're actually building that community. So what we think will happen is that many communities will be created around specific topics. They will be hyper-targeted communities about, for example, not only football, but Arsenal fans that live in Old Street, or very, very specific type of communities. So that way, we will effectively remove the ownership of the platforms, but give it back to the people in the way of very targeted communities. There will be thousands of very small communities, and overall we believe that it could be bigger than the existing social networks like Facebook. In a way, it's more akin to a Wikipedia page, because the users are able to build blocks of those worlds in which they can then live into. And so, of course, there will be games as well in those communities, but more importantly, the social element is the most important part of it. Whether you want to join a conference about something or whether you want to actually build your own environment. So this is the first realization that we had, where we actually see already a lot of signs pointing to social VR becoming a lot more interesting. A lot more people are jumping into it and starting to create content. And so we started thinking, how is that ecosystem going to work? There is, as of today, no paid social platform. People expect this content to be free, and therefore that means advertising has to play a role in those communities as well. Now we know that the way that advertising currently works on the web is fairly dysfunctional. Of course, it's two-dimensional for once. It's very intrusive. It creates a bad experience. And we know over the past few months, there's been a lot of scandals around the way that the personal data was used as well. So when we identified that opportunity that no one was actually addressing how we can monetize the worlds of tomorrow, we also wanted to do it the right way to make sure that, of course, we would not replicate the mistakes that are being made in the ad tech industry. And these two main points are intrusiveness, so creating a great experience instead of intruding on the user, and also basically giving people their ownership of their own data rather than centralizing this into a body that is able to resell it and do all kinds of things with it. And so that's how ADMIX came about. We are a monetization platform that is really aimed at the developers, and it's about giving the developers the right tools for them to monetize the worlds that they want to create. It can be games, but it can also be, of course, the social applications that I just mentioned. So let's talk about how we are tackling the two challenges that I mentioned. The first one is intrusiveness. So at a high level, what we want to do is giving the developers the ability to place native ads in the environment just like they would be in the real world. So that's a typical example of a social world or a game that would take place in a city where you normally have fake billboards. What we can do is integrating real billboards paid for by real advertisers, and whenever a user is actually in the scene, the developer would get real money every time someone looks at it. And so how it works in practice, so we have a Unity extension. So if you're a developer, you're building this room, for example, you can use our extension. You can select different type of placement. They can be banners, they can be videos, they can be 3D elements. You place them whenever you want in your environment, and you click a button, and that basically attaches a script to it. Now, that gives them the ability to really place the elements wherever they want. So because they are placing it in their own environment, we can be sure that they're not going to put ads everywhere because they still want people to use their apps. But we also need to make sure that they have control over the type of ads that appear to make sure it's relevant to the content. So the next step, they can then move into our web platform from where they can select all the placement that they've previously created and select the type of advertisers they want. So because we work programmatically with all the big ad networks, we basically have hundreds of thousands of advertisers willing to buy those spaces. And so therefore it's very easy to just segment them based on the categories. So now we have an environment where the developer controls the place where they want to put their ads, and they also control the type of ads that are actually displayed there. And so, like I said, it can be banners, it can be videos, but what we're really excited about is bringing the next generation of ads, which are essentially product placement. So you can see imagine this is a VR room where you could have a virtual meeting, for example, and it would be very easy to simply place elements just like they would be in the real world. So what's very cool about those things is when the user actually gets close to the pizza box, they can actually open it, see what's inside, interact with it. And for them, as far as they're concerned, this is really not an ad. It's part of the content because it has been placed in the right spots and it's showing the right brand. Now, of course, we can do the same with AR. It's fairly similar in terms of technologies. So if you consider this small game that would normally monetize with this ugly banner, what we can do instead is just placing an element in the content that will be tracked just like the rest of the content. And of course, it generates much better engagement from the user and much better recall of the brand. So that is how we are solving at least one of the two problems, which is the intrusiveness of the ads. So now let's talk about personal data. So you've probably seen over the past month, but I mean, this is not a new issue. Facebook suffered a lot of backlash about the way they were handling private data. And so, of course, this is something that is very, very important for us. Every time we mention that we are creating ad tech in VR, people get very scared about the things that we could do. They think that, you know, because it's VR, we can track where people are looking, we can actually feed that information back to advertisers, we can understand their emotion, and it's true, we actually can do that. But it doesn't mean that we should. And we actually think that we don't really need to do that. The reason why we think so, oh, missed that slide. The reason why we think that we do not need to do that lies in the previous answer about the type of content that will be available in VR. Like we said, it's about hyper-targeted communities around a specific topic. On the web, everyone goes on Facebook, everyone goes on Forbes, on all those websites. So the publishers and the advertisers need personal data to be able to efficiently target the users and to be able to show them ads that will actually bring them back money. But in VR, because it's not going to be as centralized, you'll have all kinds of small communities around specific topics. It's a lot easier for advertisers to then target the content and the context of the community instead of the actual personal information. So you can imagine if we have a community, like I said before, fans of the Arsenal football club that live next to Wall Street. So without knowing any personal information about the people who actually consume content in that community, I know a few things already. I know that they like Arsenal and that they live next to Wall Street. So I can easily use some brands, promote some brands who would help them buy tickets for the next game, or some merchandise from the club, or some restaurants in the area where they live. And that is without having to know anything about them, just because the community is hyper-targeted. Therefore, it will attract specific amount of people, specific types of people. And so this is how we think that the industry is going to evolve. And a lot of signs on the social front are pointing to the fact that these communities will be hyper-targeted and they will be built by the consumer themselves. Therefore, it's not only one company, of course, that is going to build all of these different apps. It's the users using the tools that they have that are going to create all these communities. And there will be communities about everything, just like there are Facebook pages or Facebook groups or Reddit subreddits about literally everything. And so for us, what's really important, more than knowing the user, is knowing the content. And that is what I've shown before in the demo. We're putting a lot of emphasis on giving developers the right tools to categorize the content that they're building. Is it a game? What type of game? Is it a social experience? What kind of experience is it? And by doing that, without knowing anything about the users, we will be able to use contextual advertising. So we think that in the future, advertisers will be able to use context instead of targeting the person. And we think that is a great thing because no one wants to share their information. So effectively, that is how we are planning to tackle these two big problems, which are intrusiveness and the use of personal data. At the end of the day, we want to create a better future for VR by giving developers the right tools to be successful financially, to be able to create more content. And we would all win if VR wins. Now, this fragmentation of hyper-localized, hyper-targeted communities kind of create another issue that is not very mainstream at all yet, but it's something that we're expecting to happen. And it's the fact that if you have all these small communities, it's going to create a fragmentation problem. It's going to be very difficult to access them, and it's going to be quite tricky for people to actually communicate between them. Essentially, it's going to be like an internet before the web. Back in the 70s, internet already existed. It was mostly static databases. No one could access them. No one really knew how to consume that information. And then the web came along and brought, of course, the browser and the hyperlink, the ability to consume that information and to jump from one website to another. So as a metaphor, what we need is hyperlinks for virtual reality, is the ability to jump from one community to another. And so yesterday we actually revealed one of these projects, a pilot between two social worlds, Somnium Space and High Fidelity. You might know High Fidelity. Its founder has found its second life, so he's a big pioneers of the virtual world. And so I'd like to show you a little preview of the video that we shared yesterday. So we named that unit the Oasis. If you know Ready Player One, you will know why. So obviously this is just a test. It was for the first time where you could drag and drop one of these portals that you've seen into one app, and then you can select your destination and end up in the other app. So we see this as a future discovery tool where you will be able to discover new content that you might not have seen just by browsing the destination, just like you're browsing a map. But it goes further than this, and I just want to leave you with this. What we are really excited about is not simply traveling from one app to another. We think that with all these hyper-targeted communities, it's going to be very tricky for the users to actually manage their identity. Right now you have one identity on Facebook, one on Google, and that pretty much enables you to travel the web. Imagine if you have to join 100 communities, that means you have to create 100 profiles with 100 different identities, avatars. That becomes very complicated. So more important than just the travel element, what the Oasis is about identity and maintaining your identity across different worlds. So when you travel through that platform, you would also maintain your identity, you would maintain the currency that you have, the objects that you might have from one world to another. So it's really a way to create a virtual identity that will be maintained and operable across all the worlds of tomorrow. And so, of course, this is not a project that we're working on alone. This is something that is beyond the interest of one single company. And so we're very proud to work with partners like Somnium Space, High Fidelity, Janus VR, and quite a few others. And our goal is to create a standard for online identity. So that's about us. I'd love to answer your questions.
If I could start with a question, Sam. In terms of the advertising content that you would allow within a set environment, would it always be context specific? For example, could a television only be seen to be advertising things that you would see, I suppose, programs or movies, or would you allow brands to advertise, say, for example, fashion, as long as they presented it in a format like an advert on the television?
Yeah, so it's really the developer that decides, the content owner, if they're happy to show ads about fashion, because even if the app is not about fashion, but because it's in a house and in your house you used to see ads about fashion, if they're happy with it, we're happy with it. We're just essentially giving them access to millions of advertisers and then bringing them filters so they can filter what they want or what they don't want.
If anyone else has any questions, I can bring you the mic.
Thank you. How do the companies that we will be advertising for within the space control what is the audience that is going to receive it? It might be that they don't want to pay for those particular players to see that advertising because it's not the likely buyers.
Well, because we can target the context, they are actually likely to be the buyers, because only people who are very, very interested, you know, to get the example of the Arsenal fans that live in central London, if people join that community, you can be pretty sure that they will be fans of that club and they live in central London. So the advertisers would know that. and they would advertise accordingly. They wouldn't know anything about the actual data of the person, so they wouldn't be able to, augment their profile or advertise about something else because they have tracked that user across the internet, but they would know these two things for sure. And so we will only target brands that are relevant to people who like football and live in central London. And because they use the interfaces such as Google and AOL and Yahoo to buy those ads, they don't use us. We partner with third parties. They have access to the same, filters and targeting elements that they would normally have for the web. So for them, it's just another media buy. It really doesn't make any difference to be in VR, AR.
Do you see these elements becoming something that could be interactive within someone's experience? So obviously, in the beginning, it's static graphic or an object. For example, the Pepsi tin that you were showing there. So yeah, say within that, would you have elements that you could use that could be part of a task that someone has to achieve in a game or a story?
Yeah, definitely. The way that the tech works, going back to that video, it's really bringing new objects in the scene, and then we attach a script to those objects that then render the brand on top. But because it's an object, it's subject to the same laws of physics and whatever. So in the case of the pizza box, for example, we have different tiers of engagement, so we can that would generate different payout for the advertiser. If you simply look at it, if you interact with it, or if you actually buy the pizza, we could imagine having an e-commerce element as part of it as well.
What timeline do you see for people moving from Facebook communities to VR type communities?
So that's a very long timeline. I mean, I'm talking, over the next decade. For sure, we need people first to have the headsets. We need. I mean, it's a big social shift. And I'm not saying that Facebook is going to disappear, but I'm just saying that there are going to be very specific communities, and people are starting to get sick of, the Facebook and Google duopoly and giving all their information away. So for very specific topics, we are going to see a quicker migration, but then of course it's going to take time for everyone else to be a part of this.
Related question, do you really see a world where there's going to be all of these almost like micro communities, or another version of Facebook that runs the VR world?
No, so I really see a world where it's going to be decentralized and owned by different platforms, where the actual brand of the platform, whether it's high fidelity, sensor, that doesn't matter, because people are not going to say, I'm going to high fidelity. They're going to say, I'm going to that community where I can share my passion about Arsenal because I live in central London. So the company that owns this almost doesn't matter. It becomes just a platform, the tools to build the community. So what you've seen in Ready Player One, which is one company that owns the entire Oasis, that is just not realistic, because people want to build their own worlds. They don't want to be subject to just a few worlds that a company like Facebook would have created. And so if you give them the tools to do it, because there is 7 billion people out there, it's going to grow much quicker than if only one company takes care of the building process.
So just to play devil's advocate to your point, you theorize that people want to go into niche communities, but that didn't happen with Facebook because people wanted to be where everybody else was, and then formed communities within one parent company because of the fluidity of just having all your communities under one umbrella. You're saying that multiple companies are going to pop up and people are happy to move between them, but that sort of opposes what already happened.
Well, I mean, it has. I guess there's been different examples of that happening as well on the web. But my point is that I think, having this single identity would kind of help bridge that problem, because you will be able to move from one to another. You're not going to be segmented to one specific community. You'll be able to see all the friends, but we just need to build the links to enable people to do that.